Thanks for checking out a fresh episode of the Restoration Today podcast. I have two friends joining me today. I'm very excited to have them here. It's Chris Nordyke and Brandon Reece. They are from Floodlight Consulting Group. My husband calls them the mustache guys. That might be how you recognize them. I don't know. Their logo is mustaches and amazing. They've got some amazing mugs hanging out on their desk with them today. So I am very excited to have them join me. They are really forward-thinking consultants in the industry. They also have their own podcast that is really well listened to, Head, Heart, Boots. They write for CNR, all the things. Their presence is everywhere at this point. I think you're going to be keynote speakers coming up pretty soon at an upcoming conference. So I just want to talk about all the exciting things. So Chris and Brandon, thank you very much for being here. I am going to toss it over to you. I don't know who wants to start, just to introduce yourselves a little bit for people who aren't familiar with you yet.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Go ahead, buddy.
Okay. Yeah. So, Brandon and I are kind of fellow travelers in this restoration industry. We came together. We've known each other pushing 10 years.
Yeah.
And been working together for the better part of that. And we run Floodlight Consulting Group. Like you mentioned, Head, Heart, and Boots is really kind of an expression of Brandon and I, and a passion project for us. And then in addition to consulting, we do live workshops, for people around the industry. I think, while we teach, we coach, we mentor, we problem solve, we do all the things that people would expect a consulting company to do in our industry. But I think the two areas of passion that Brandon and I really try to focus on is how do we develop leaders within our team, and how do we develop healthy cultures? Because, the nuts and bolts, most of us know what to do. We need accountability. And that's where that consulting and coaching comes in. But I think, how we're leading ourselves, how we're treating each other, how we're, the culture we're building within our team, that's kind of the magic, right? That I think differentiates us as companies and creates long-term success, right? So Brandon and I really love to camp out there in that headspace of how do we think as leaders? How do we treat others as leaders? What does that look like day to day? That's really kind of the fun stuff for Brandon.
And then passion.
Yeah, and then commercial sales. I sort of have a reputation for being on the sales side, and I love sales. But I think part of my passion that sort of comes through in the sales part is, I think we've often thought incorrectly about sales, not just in restoration, but really in probably most industries. And I talk a lot about how really what we're trying to do is get to the truth, in our selling activity with prospects and clients, right? We really just want to understand what their situation is, what their past experience has been with other vendors. And then I have something real to offer them, right? And so often our industry and others have been kind of baked into this promotional selling. Let me tell you about how awesome we are and why it's important and why you should use us, instead of really focusing on the customer and saying, okay, what's your experience been? And is there a place for me to kind of slide in and be a partner, right? And make that experience better. And then I've got something that the customer cares about to talk about. So anyways, that leadership, growing leaders, and then selling maybe from a different vantage point or posture, right, is kind of two really key areas that we've
kind of the backbone.
Yeah, we've focused on,
So Brandon, talk about your area of expertise a little bit, because Chris is on the selling side. So talk about, you both have restoration backgrounds. You're not new to this industry. So share a little bit about your side of things.
Sure. So my side's pretty much always been on the operational, elements of the business. So, we were actually just kind of having a bit of a side conversation ourselves this morning, and just continuing to get more and more clear on this alignment of what are you passionate about? What do you get excited about? And how do we do more and more of that as part of our day-to-day activities? But yeah, it's operations. It's the people power. I think a lot of people, when we think about operations, we get almost too heavily indexed on the nuts and bolts, as Chris would say, like the how-tos. Valuable. Like, we look at that. It's kind of like saying, if I'm a professional contractor, I'm going to do the job on budget and on time. Okay, well, that's the base standard because you're a professional. So we feel like providing knowledge around tools and systems and processes is the base, but then where we want to go above and beyond that to continue to provide value is that people power piece. What are we doing? How is it affecting the way that we guide our team, cast that vision, get everybody rowing in the same direction, break down silos, those kinds of things. So I've just that's the vein I've come up in, and I just really love it. I think Chris and I, where our lanes begin to converge a little bit, is just this dedication to, we love creating leaders in organizations. That's a real force multiplier that kind of is more the legacy side of what Chris and I do, right? Like kind of that personal mission side. That's that piece that I think when I get to the end of my run, I'm hopefully going to look back and be pretty proud of the lives that we were able to kind of touch in a positive way because of building leaders. So yeah, that's kind of my side, I guess.
So I know you both love telling stories, and stories are the way I think people relate to us the best, right? So I actually want to take a minute to do some storytelling and hear stories from both of you. I laugh whenever I listen to your podcast because you often have funny stories that have recently happened or whatever, like rude people on airplanes or whatever it may be. So I love listening to your stories. And so I would love, like, Brandon, if you told a story from the operations side, this whole people oriented leadership style, an example of something that you've come across as a leader, a story from your path so far that relates to that. And then Chris, I would toss it over to you and share kind of a sales story. You had an article that you wrote on solutions-based selling for CNR that had a great story in it. So I would love to hear stories from both of you. So Brandon, I'm going to let you start.
Okay. Yeah. It's great timing. So, one of the things that we have the honor of is that we have both our own experiences that we pull from, consistently. And then we just are honored to have these experiences where we meet with teams all over the nation. And they, of course, have their own color and experiences that they bring to the table. And one of the things that Chris and I were both talking through is recently we worked with a team, and that team has a fairly substantial leadership team already in place. They've been key leaders for quite some time. And then you have the owners of the business. And it was just very interesting to watch both of these group from a third party perspective, owners with real life concerns and fears about pushing their team too hard and coming across too aggressive about, this is the strategy, this is where we're going. And then to listen to a leadership team that is so ready to go, but then feeling like and commenting on, hey, I don't know if the owners are convicted. I don't know if they're ready to go. Right. So watching this from 30,000 feet, this display of what happens between our ears and ultimately how that plays out in the way that we build our business, and how they're ultimately aligned and ready to rock and roll for the same cause, but neither one of them know it yet. And I know I created lots of opportunities where through assumptions and things like that, I didn't realize we wanted the same thing, but I was in conflict with them and they were in conflict with me, and we didn't even really know why. So I think that story-wise, and there's probably a million of those, of just this example of how often we get stuck in our own head about these fears and concerns, and we let those carry far more weight than the conviction to have a dialogue and ask questions and get it out on the table so that we all know where we're headed and why we're going there.
Yeah.
It's your turn.
I was cycling through sort of a litany of stories, of sales stories, of both of, like Brandon was saying, client stories, and then also my own experiences. And I don't think I've ever shared this story. I'm going to try to make a nutshell version of it. I don't think I've ever shared this publicly.
Oh,
okay. We're here for it.
So people that read my article, the solutions-based selling article on CNR, you can check it out there. It's all in the archives. It's pretty decent. I talk about the PMAT story.
Yes.
And so Scott Youngblood, if you're listening, hey man, you were one of my favorites. Scott, it's interesting. Scott's also in our master course. We have a video of an actual interview with him, and we talk about the PMAT story. But so most people have heard the PMAT story. If you haven't, go to CNR and check it out.
Yep.
But with Scott Youngblood, shortly after that, and I think I mentioned this in the article, we ended up doing some work for him. And then shortly after that, he called me up and he said, "Hey, Chris, the tile in our hotel, we're getting dinged for it. It's got light grout and, foot oils and all this kind of stuff. It's making it look dingy. And we got dinged for it on our last quality survey." And I was like, okay. Kind of similar to the PMAT thing. I'm like, all right, well, we do tile cleaning. Yeah, we can. He's like, no, we've cleaned it a multitude of ways. We pressure washed it. We've used all the chemicals and stuff like that. I said, well, let's give it one more try. And we had an idea and it didn't do a ton. And he called me up about a week after that and he said, hey, Chris, we're thinking of staining the tile grout a different color, turn it into a dark color to make it look nicer. Do you guys do that? Of course, my instinct is, right, I want to try to solve this guy's problem. And so I started calling tile and grout companies that did staining.
Okay.
And I brought it to the leadership team like, hey, guys, I got this little thing here, great client. And we were kind of split down the middle. We had a couple people on the team who were like, oh, we could do that in-house. And then there was more people on the team that were like, hell no.
It's kind of making my skin crawl thinking about it.
This was quite the thing. Anyway, so we ended up getting a subcontractor. I ended up telling them, yes, hey, we'll help you out. We found this, let's call it Tile Genie. I don't think that was actually their name. But they're like, oh yeah, we do that all the time. Got a bid for it. Long story short, it was an absolute fiasco. My next call from Scott was, hey, Chris, I need you to come down here and see this. And I'm like, of course, this was like an hour and a half away from our corporate office. And so I drive up there with my tail between my legs thinking something is wrong here. And sure enough, I look at this job. This is like a very successful hotel, right?
Yeah.
And the grout lines are smeared across the tile. They're stained. This is like a 250 room hotel, very successful. Scott is an iconic leader within Hilton and all this stuff.
It looked like it had been done with like crayons by like a 4-year-old.
I was trying to imagine how you were keeping it off the tile. So, okay, continue.
Yeah, we didn't.
Which, of course, everybody on the leadership team kind of knew this is why we don't want to try to attempt this because we hadn't done it before and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, long story short, like that, like the instinct was right. Like we want to try to help our client. We want to be their go-to resource, but sometimes it doesn't always work out the way you want. But at the end of the day, right, we still preserve the relationship because part of that was I literally pulled an overnight shift with one of our technicians to wire brush and scrub out all of those grout lines in like a 1,600 square foot pool room.
Oh no.
And these are like 1/4-inch grout lines. So there's like 1,000,000 miles of this shit.
We worked through, I don't know how many wire brushes. I hadn't worked that hard since I was in high school working construction. Like, it was a crazy story, but
what's the lesson?
Well, the lesson is at the end of the day, like we're there to help solve people's problems. And even when things go sideways, our commitment to solving their problem is what hangs in their mind, right? It's what positions us as more of a peer and a partner.
Oh,
because
still friends.
Yeah, we're still friends. Like I can still call Scott and go hang. If I'm going to go to Portland, I could go grab coffee with him and it's awesome. So it's not that we always have to be perfect, like I don't know if I would necessarily do that differently in the sense that
I'd hire a different contractor.
We would have hired a different contractor, but sometimes you just don't know. But I think it's that commitment to the partnership that ultimately is what stands out to people on their resume with you. It's like, well, that bad thing happened, but God, Nordyke was on his freaking knees for 8 hours. Like Scott said goodbye to us at like 10 p.m. I had already been there for 3 hours with our tech scrubbing on my hands and knees. And when he showed up in the morning, we were still there and not done. I mean, it was one of those nightmare scenarios, but I think it's all about our commitment to our client and they see that. And they also know shit goes wrong, and it's what are people going to do when stuff goes wrong that really conveys what kind of partner and builds the trust, So,
obviously don't keep doing it wrong,
but don't stain grout lines if you can avoid it.
If you can avoid it, don't do it.
I was at a hotel recently and I was looking at the white grout thinking this really does not look great. And how do they keep this all clean? But now, okay. And come
on, interior designers, come on, talk to some housekeeping crews, right? Before you put in.
Why would you do this to yourself?
Oh my gosh, it's crazy.
Okay, so I'm curious with this scenario, or even both of them, how do you coach your clients on when to say no? Like when you're checking your gut, because not all jobs are meant for us, right? But you did learn something good through this. So it wasn't a total loss. You kept the relationship through it. Yeah. You learned some lessons. So where's that line between deciding this job is not for us and going with the people that say no versus going with the people that said yes?
Yeah, well, so I have my perspective and I want to hear if Brandon has anything to add, but what I learned from that and other scenarios where we promised a little bit outside of our wheelhouse and it was either hard or it went sideways is, to me, it taught me the importance of us in our role as a restoration contractor. I think this is somewhat unique, although you might say that a general contractor remodeler has a similar responsibility, is we have a responsibility to know our resources and for us to cultivate great partnerships with subcontractors, specialty contractors, and suppliers, because I think part of our role as a restoration company, particularly as we start serving commercial, is we want to be the go-to facility partner. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to say that about ourselves, like that's really popular right now for people to talk about themselves as a partner and all that kind of stuff. But what goes into that? Like when I think of a partner, or some of the partner examples I have is like, I have like an attorney that I've worked with in past businesses and stuff. Like, and what I like about my attorney is I can call my attorney and he has a whole list of people that he can recommend me to in a whole variety of areas, right? He's sort of a trusted resource. Some people, they're CPAs like that, right? And certainly consultants, we take that very seriously, of having a list of vetted people. And so I just learned, God, it's really important for me to know our subs and know my resources and to always be developing partnerships. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes we get tunnel vision. We go to these association conferences and stuff, and we're so insular, we're so focused on my prospect and my company that we don't walk the floor and meet all the other industry vendors.
Yeah.
Like I don't bother asking them a bunch of curious questions to understand their culture, their process, their standards, their expectations on themselves. So I start to have a sight picture in my mind. Somebody needs this. Okay, I have a relationship that I've been cultivating where I can confidently refer them because I know they have a similar ethic or a certain similar process that we utilize. I mean, that is just so important. If you're going to say you do commercial, you're going to say that you're a partner, that's one of the things you have to dedicate energy to, you know?
Yes.
I think another way to look at it is it more from the intentional perspective. So proactively managing that. So example would be, I've got to be honest when I'm assessing the state of my business and asking myself the question, do we have the energy to deviate right now? And if the answer is no, then the answer for that client or that particular project should be no for now. So then that way, when the team decides, hey, we've got the energy, the bandwidth to dedicate resources to learning this, right, to establishing some protocols and some process, then that's the time to say yes, because you are going to make some mistakes, right? So like one of the things about the story that Chris talked through is our team at the time was doing an intentional push to grow our facility services connections, our client base, and learning how to be a better partner for them. So like there's never a bunch of free time, but there was intentional energy being dedicated to that service line. And so when we made some mistakes, the team was still behind, okay, let's problem solve this. Let's move forward. It's not always going to be pretty at the beginning. So I would just say, I think, is make sure that your team has decided they've got the energy to develop that skill set or that competency. And if you don't right now, that's fine. Just do what you're good at and continue to lean into that. And save those other experiences for when the team's ready to take that on. And I think a lot of that has to do with where your leaders are and what lane they're operating in. Because if we don't have that kind of proactive mental energy to give stuff like that, it can really hammer our brand. And then we have a tough time recovering.
Yeah, I think it is like, so between those two, right, there's this, I think, an ethic of we want to try to say no is little as possible when it comes to the clients and prospects, but the how we say yes, right? It's either we're going to take this on in house and we're going to commit to it and we're going to follow through with it no matter what. If we screw it up, we're going to pay for it. You know, we're going to bring somebody in behind us that, you know, whatever. Or we're going to do the foundational work always as a leadership team to have the relationships so we can introduce them to somebody who does do that thing or has the bandwidth or has, you know, the capacity that maybe we don't at that given time. Yeah. But I think that's super critical. I think as companies, we're probably generally not mindful of that enough as a core part of our business, is having other resources that we can, you know, extend to clients.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Okay. You both are continual lifelong learners. I can tell you're always reading and always bringing authors and speakers and experts from outside the industry as well into your podcast, which is something that I love about your platform. It's neat that like all the podcasts in the industry, we've talked about this before, are different, right? We all have different guests, a different niche, a different thing that we're doing. And so I know that again, leadership is critical for you. So I'm curious what modern leadership looks like for both of you. What you think a modern restoration company leader looks like today. We've talked about having a healthy culture and those type of things. And there's buzzwords out there like grit and discipline and determination and all those things. So what does a modern leader look like today? Because it doesn't look like it did in the 50s, 60s, 70s, whenever. Leadership looks way different now than it used to. So what do you guys think a modern leader looks like today? A well-rounded leader.
Yeah.
Why don't you hit the first few bullets there? Yeah.
Sit back and listen.
So I think, so first off, I got to be honest with you, Michelle, is I constantly live in a state of who am I to make reference to what leadership looks like, right? Like I've certainly had real life experiences from the military to building businesses that those tool sets have come into play. But I think many leaders, and I don't think I'm alone, are pretty consistently plagued with this idea that we're kind of constantly on the outer edge of our current skill set and competency level, right? And so I think, unfortunately, that comes into play in terms of how free we are with our learning, with our kind of self-analyzation and kind of looking at our responsibility that we shoulder as leaders. And I'm not insulated from that. It happens to me constantly as well. But I think there's kind of two things that I think people have to work to get a grip on. And one is that when we own a business or we've accepted a leadership position in a company, we've accepted a responsibility for the people for the sake of the people, in addition to our responsibilities to, monitor the P&L and the actions that affect our financials. And I think teams in general are pretty good at saying, okay, I have a fiscal responsibility to lead well, to provide a good service, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think we marry along with that the dedication, the drive, the continued growth and education around, okay, but I'm now responsible for people for the sake of people. So what am I doing about that side of my role? And I think one of the things that we see and talk to a lot of companies about right now is the current workforce is going to demand that from you. Mm-hmm. I think in the past you could skirt that competency and get away with it because people didn't know any better. But the reality of it is that people can see a lot of different sides of the coin all at once now. And no one really can filter us from having those perspectives or learning those perspectives. And so we bring those now to our place of employment, and our expectations have changed. Mm-hmm. And so people want leadership that is relational. They want leadership that's clear and concise about what we're doing, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. They want to belong to something where they're engaged and participating and having a voice of influence. That's hard fucking work as a leader, to create an environment that looks like that, right? And it's intimidating as hell to have a team of people that want that kind of leadership. And so I think, maybe if there's a way in a nutshell to say this is, first, we have to lock in on the responsibility that we said yes to, whether we like it or not. Mm-hmm. And then B, we have to be dedicated to growing the competencies around how we lead and educate our team and take care of the human relationship element of leadership. And so, Chris and I talk a lot about like culture development and all this stuff. And so, again, sake of transparency, there's operators out there that would clean my clock in terms of technical competency. We see them and meet them, and we're surrounded by them all the time.
Yeah.
And I think they would have a tough time getting a human being to follow them anywhere if it wasn't for the paycheck or whatever, whatever the case may be. Yep. And I think that what we're learning and realizing is that so much more of that human element is at play in terms of when we're winning and when we're not. And we end up fighting fires and trying to solve problems that have nothing to do with process and systems, and have everything to do with our ability to articulate, if I can say it right, that human relationship element. Like, hey, I want to hear from you, understand you. What's affecting your decision process? What's potentially holding you back? What's creating fear or hesitation on your side? Here's what it looks like for me, right? And getting those kinds of things on the table so that we can actually get to the root cause of what's pausing our business or creating friction or whatever. Is that clear? And does that make sense? You know what I mean?
Yes.
And
Yes, it was a good answer. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, and I think the other aspect of that, it's like just different sides of the same coin. Is I think we're learning that I can't, and I said this in a little promotional video for Core a couple days ago, or I don't even know what day of the week it is. This idea that as leaders, we can't take people where we haven't gone ourselves. You know, I think it's the definition of a leader is that we're out front, right? And so like when we want our people to be self-aware, independent, thoughtful, strategic, you know, all those things, that self-awareness piece, it's like, I think sometimes we don't even know what we want from our employees, but self-awareness is a big part of it. Like, dude, do you realize how others are experiencing you? Right. Is I think sometimes some version of a question that goes through our head when we interact with employees, like, what the hell, you know, they do things or say things in a group environment. We want our people to be more self-aware. But I think a lot of times we haven't done, I know I'm speaking for me. When I look back over my leadership career, there's been a lot of times in my leadership career when I look back and it's rather embarrassing, to be honest. Like when I first owned a State Farm insurance agency, I had 5 full-time employees. I had a fairly large agency as far as State Farm agencies go. And I think at the time, I thought I was a pretty good boss. I probably would have qualified myself as a decent leader. And now, of course, in hindsight, I realized just how little awareness I had of how my team was experiencing me. And so I think when you talk about modern leadership, I think what we're all starting to learn as leaders is that what's happening here, right? And between my ears, the stories I tell myself about myself, my people, have probably the biggest impact on my influence and my power and my success as a leader. It's maybe is the biggest thing that affects my overall company is the tone I'm setting, right? And then that speaks to integrity. It speaks to all the things that I think we also associate with leadership. Integrity for me, like Brandon and I, we spend a lot of time talking about integrity and honesty lately, because I think we're pretty reckless about how we throw some of these leadership terms around. Mm-hmm. And I think we also, like, through the process of establishing core values and stuff, we name ourselves, we put these labels on ourselves. Oh, we're a company that values integrity and all this kind of stuff. But then if you really reflect on that, you really look at what's happening, you go visit your job sites, right? You listen to your people when they don't realize that you're listening. You start to realize, you know what, there's some air gap in a lot of different areas between what I'm saying about myself or what I'm saying about our company and what the actual lived experience is for my people and or my clients, you know? And so I just think that self-reflection, there's a self-care component in there too. Like we could spin out on this for a long time, but when I think of modern leadership, I think it is what Brandon said, and it's that internal piece that so many of us neglect for a lot of our careers. In my case, I feel like I'm 43 and I feel like I really got turned onto this or tuned into it really just in the last 5-6 years, you know, Brandon and I working together, like we forced each other, I think, to stare at this stuff more, you know, in our work together. We kind of, Brandon and I, we've done a fair bit of this in our sort of growing up together to where it's just kind of instigated change within both of us and other leaders that we've worked with, of course, you know, but anyway.
Yeah. I think one thing to just kind of maybe piggyback on that is at least, or at a minimum, you're currently exploring this, right? So like Chris's reference to, we can't take our people through something we haven't done ourselves. I agree. And we can be honest about the fact that you didn't have to necessarily do all the work prior to this experience or this opportunity, but just share in it and then be honest and transparent about what that experience looks like for you. Like that, can be a double-edged sword. We can be overly sharing, meaning we just dump on our people who don't need that responsibility. But being clear about, hey, I'm in the same journey with you. I'm exploring these kind of self-evaluation methods or these different, communication methods or whatever. And sometimes it's working great and sometimes it's not. You're going to get a lot more respect from somebody than if you pose and act as if, right? Because the reality, I think one of the things I've learned over the years is our people see clearly a lot more of what's happening in our business.
Yes.
And we give them credit.
Oh man.
They see the holes, they see the leaks, they see the inconsistencies, they see that you talk this way with that person and this way with somebody else. And then they layer a bunch of other stories and experiences on top of that. Right. Yeah. So I think being more honest with where we're winning and where we're not is really important for modern leadership.
We're coming out of generations of command and control leadership.
Yes.
Right. Like I think about my own father. He's a school teacher. There's very much a kind of command and control culture within school districts and stuff like that with teachers and policy and procedure and bureaucracy and da, 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 da. And I think of my grandfather, who is a machinist, worked for a titanium manufacturing company for like 45 years. It was like, you stay in line, you do what you're told, and you'll get paid and you'll have security.
Yep.
And so we're now, a lot of millennials are like, well, screw that. I can start a YouTube channel and make $2,000 a month. And I'd rather make less and have control over my life and do what's important to me and the things I value than to go make 5 for you and have you tell me what to do. And now they're starting to get where they can make 5, you know what I mean? So like people have options now, and it's forcing employers to be like, oh, okay, I gotta learn a different playbook. Yeah. I got to learn a different playbook because things have fundamentally changed.
Yeah. Why would someone want to work for you?
I think it's humility. I think part of that too is like, that's also what leaders are not having to put on. I think it actually takes, there's an element too where it takes a big load off when as a leader you decide to sort of move more in humility. Mm-hmm. I think when I was growing up and I felt this, it was almost like just something you learn through osmosis as a kid, and you graduate high school, you're under authority. These kind of old authority structures, do what I said because I told you to kind of, environment. I think a lot of us grew up in that. Yeah. Then you move into your job and then somebody's in authority. But then when you're the boss, it's just kind of instinctive. You just kind of move right in that. And yet, I think a lot of the admired leaders that all of us read about, we're starting to see more of these interviews, and it's like leaders learning how to value the people around them as people just like themselves, right? In this, Brandon and I are reading this book called Leadership and Self-Deception. I did a little LinkedIn post this morning about it. Yep. And there's this line that just offered a lot of clarity that I think as leaders, we used to see ourselves as the person in the room, right? With all our authority, our power and position, our strategic view, our role in the company or on the company, whatever. Now, of course, we don't say this stuff out loud. It's not like we're all a bunch of little assholes, running around like my power, my authority, it's got right. Like we don't say this stuff out loud, but this is how we show up a lot of times is I am the person in the room that has something to communicate versus now it's I am a person in the room that has something to contribute. That used to be, I think, a very weak or be perceived as sort of a weak place to move from as a leader. And I think now it's seen as more of a superpower, leaders that can, take that posture and that position, because then they get more and more out of their people. Mm-hmm. It's less about them and the single contribution they can make, and more about them creating the space where other people can freely contribute. They feel safe, they feel respected and appreciated, all that kind of stuff,
Our, we versus I, my, yeah. Even just learning how we relate to our team. Okay, you talked a little bit about the collective, which you are going to play a big role in this year. So talk a little bit about what's happening at the collective. For those who haven't heard of it, it is the Collective by Core. It's their yearly conference. It's going to be in Austin the week before Labor Day. They always have amazing speakers and networking events. They're having a big fair at this one and all the things. So share a little bit about your plans for the collective.
Okay. So we are freaking out. Like just that plan one, freak the fuck out because we're so excited.
There's 62 days and 13 hours.
That's right.
Thanks to my Apple Watch widget.
We're really jazzed. So Chris and I are going to have the opportunity. We're going to lead two individual breakouts. So Chris is going to do one on the commercial side, selling side, and then I'm going to do a piece just around kind of this balancing act between relationship and accountability with our people. And then we are going to be on the main stage, which we're really psyched about. And our talk specifically is called The Heart of the Matter. And we're kind of intentionally leaving some details out. So like a lot of the promo videos that you're going to get from people, it's like, you're going to take away X, Y, Z from your, from your time participating in this stage time. And we are not doing that. And we're not doing that intentionally. So
can I give like a very little?
Yeah, very little.
Just a small, like little sight picture. I'm using that analogy a lot, like in a gun, you're looking at your target.
Yeah, I like that.
It's just a little bit of a sight picture for folks. So Brandon and I, 6-7 years ago, probably, we were attending this thing called Global Leadership Summit based out of Chicago, actually, I believe. And one of the speakers was this guy named Bill Hybels, and he was talking about leadership, and he drew a picture on a flip chart. It was basically like a big circle and a line in the middle, and that was a leader. And he was just talking about how the behaviors, the way they react to things, the way they coach, the way they treat people, the way they talk, all of those things are up here on the top half. And then down at the bottom, he drew a bunch of X's at the bottom of the circle. And then he drew a line between them. And he said, what we often miss is the way we behave, the way we show up, the way people perceive it. All that kind of stuff is always tied to past experiences and interactions with people. It's like file folders that we're pulling in different situations. Oh, I know what's going on here. And we pull that file folder when we react out of those past experiences and relationships. And I was just so impacted. Both of us were so impacted by that for so many years. And it goes to what we were talking about in modern leadership is self-leadership first. Yeah. Know thyself. Right. And so often as leaders, we're acting out of those, for lack of a better term, those broken places. Every single one of us has them, and they all look different. The genesis of those broken places is going to look different for every single person, but yet we're all behaving and responding and reacting out of that until we become aware of it. And then we have an option. Am I going to react out of that place or whatever? So Brandon and I, we really want to take people on a journey of what does that look like in leadership? And what do I do with that? It's like these big highfalutin ideas of psychology and stuff like that. But I think Brandon and I are going to walk people into some of our leadership story and our journey. And we're hoping, this is the scary part, right? It's like whenever you're vulnerable, whenever you're like self-sharing at sort of a personal level, there's that fear of, am I the only one? But I think we both know, right, that as leaders, this is maybe our greatest battle in our leadership journey is what's going on in here and in between our ears. And so we're going to lean into that hard. We're going to pull back the kimono for folks.
Kimono.
It'll be interesting. It's going to be fun.
I think people will walk away certainly feeling something. There's going to be some element of I relate to this and I've got to think on this further. Or they're going to be fairly intimidated by the idea and intentionally shelf it for a while. I don't think there's going to be any in the middle, which we're actually
we're okay with either
excited about. Yeah, I think both will have the impact that we're shooting for. So that's that piece. We're really excited about it. Our team's been planning and kind of thinking through how to create that space for that. And we're just super excited. And then another thing I'm kind of excited about specifically is Joey's going to be there. So Joey's the keynote, the actual keynote. And I think people that have heard Joey Coleman on our show before, you get the guy's magic. His stage presence is going to be even more banging. He is literally a professional stage speaker, so he's really dialed in. But he's going to touch on some stuff for folks where on the sales side, we get to see this relational connection point where it actually feeds the bottom line. And I think that's just a theme in general that people are going to probably pick up on a bit at the collective. And for us, it's why we're excited about our continued relationship with Core. And right, wrong, or indifferent, whether, franchise, non-franchise, if you're interested in their business model elements or not, as a leadership group, they do want to speak a kind of language that's very human. And from my perspective, they're putting their money where their mouth is, and we are excited to continue to participate and be partners in those kinds of activities with them. So
we had, I think it was at RIA, we broke out because we were, supposed to talk about the collective with Dan and Beth, and we met them at the coffee shop, and we had kind of this short agenda, like 3 or 4 things we had to talk about relative to topics and whatnot. We spent 2 hours.
Yeah.
We spent 2 hours at this level, just like talking as people. Yeah. And that like, we didn't end up even getting into our agenda really at all in that. And yet there was something really important about that conversation.
100%.
Like our experience as people, as families, as people, leaders in the industry, while also being parents, and we covered a lot of territory, and none of it had to do with the conference, and yet it seemed really important. And I think that's because, in general, our industry, we don't probably spend enough time in this territory of how we make people feel.
Yeah,
the nuts and bolts of our industry, everybody's doing it. Anybody can go get an SBA loan and go do that.
We all dry good.
Yeah, we all dry good, and we all can go buy equipment and trucks and all that kind of stuff. That's just money. How we make people feel, right? That's the everything else, And so anyway, there's a lot of flavor of that mixed in with Core, and we're super stoked.
Yeah, we're excited just to go.
Yeah,
just to be there.
Well, in Austin, this will be my first time in Austin, actually.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun. They put on a good event. They know what they're doing. That is for sure. And yes, their team is totally authentic, and they have the diversity panels that they do and all the things. So it is awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing you there, gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here. Any quick nuggets before we wrap it up? Throw out a favorite book. You're working on a book right now, but throw out, if people are going to read one book right now, what should they be reading?
Oh my gosh, I think this is it, potentially.
Yeah, Leadership and Self-Deception. We're actually going to do a book club review with the Blue Collar Boys, Eric and Larry, in 2 or 3 weeks. So that'll probably be out next month. So awesome, people read it right now, and whenever they're hearing this podcast,
it's worth it.
Yep,
it'll shape a lot.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. It's always fun catching up with you. Thanks for bringing your mugs and having those front and center there. And thank you for the stickers that you sent me. I've relabeled some of my own mugs in my house with those. So thank you. I always appreciate having you on. Thank you for being so authentic and sharing your stories, and for all you do for CNR and for the industry in general. And I look forward to seeing you in Austin.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, we're stoked.
For more restoration today and the latest news, visit our website, cnrmagazine.com. And find the latest episodes of the Restoration Today podcast on your favorite podcasting platform.